Folks, I realize now that I did not know what slavery truly looked like until the day I came out publicly as a conservative. For upwards to 28 years of my life, I had no idea just how bigoted people could be. That's honestly why I don't have this tragic tale to tell about, racism in my life before I came out as a conservative. But after that day, after I made it public, made it known exactly where I stand politically, it has not been the same since. Almost on a daily basis, I will engage with at least one message and one comment with genuinely racist remarks. And that's coming from both black liberals as well as white liberals and basically anybody else who's left in between. The level of racism that you experience coming out of that Democratic plantation and starting to think for yourself is unmatched. So that being said, I want to get into a video where a young lady is essentially articulating that very point. I only watched enough of it to know that this is something I want to get into. So without further ado, let's get into this and I will give my synopsis on the back end. Let's get into it.
Democrats have now been able to occupy this position of being more progressive on race, and I have not met more racist people than the liberal white people in New York who won't even send their kids to public school.
Yeah.
Like just the really subtle psychological warfare. It reminds me of the racism in England. It's like so
it's
deft.
taken on a lot of the contours of English class-based racism.
Yeah, it's like,
it has, I think for the same reason.
Yeah.
Class became so important to the Democratic Party because they are trying to serve the interests of a donor class who has a lot of money while keeping the interest.
I want to give you guys some context. These are liberals talking. These are the woke folk in either the UK. I saw Trevor Noah in the background, random as hell. But we have Trevor Noah, so South African. And of course, we have an American. These are liberals saying this. Just to give that disclaimer there.
Class became so important to the Democratic Party because they are trying to serve the interests of a donor class who has a lot of money while keeping the interests for their identity. We're progressive, we're liberals, aligned with working class, poor people, minority people.
He's uncomfortable.
So
he don't get paid to talk about that.
Things, right? Think about who you have to be to have both of those things exist for you simultaneously. You got to be delusional in kind of the same way that English people are, who will tell me to my face, we don't have racism here. We do have class, but we don't have racism, as if these are two entirely distinct. But you have to believe that when you have this like really structured class system and a really
monarchy.
Formal. That's right. And you have this really formal system of immigration, right? And I think the Democrats have oddly kind of a modified version of that for much of the same reasons. Their class politics right now do not align with their race politics.
So, I don't agree with 88.763% of what the hell they're talking about here. Yes, I am partisan. I do have my own, biases because of what I've experienced within the Democratic Party and essentially educating myself on what's actually been going on here. No party is perfect. No person is perfect, but I'd rather be in a classification that represents me. Right? That's why I classify myself as a conservative, because I hold conservative values like the nuclear family, right? Godly values, for whatever that may mean to you. Maybe that sounds bigoted. Maybe that sounds overly controlling. But for me, that is the structure in which I choose to live my life. So those are the values and principles that I hold. So be it. But anyway, to get into this conversation at hand, which is the conversation of racism and liberalism. They go hand in hand, right? Now, again, as I said, the disguise or the mask that the Democratic Party wears and has been wearing for quite some time, as early as the 1960s in America, is that of tolerance, of diversity, and it started with Lyndon Baines Johnson and the Great Society. There's a famous speech that LBJ gave, and I have to find the clip so I can present it to you guys, but he's essentially explaining how, black people have been let down by America. Now, that sounds all good and holy until you figure out that Lyndon Baines Johnson is a devout racist. He was a devout racist throughout his entire life and was known. He was outspoken. However, as he becomes the vice president under JFK, and the civil rights movement has been picking up steam, and the Civil Rights Act is making its headway. It makes its way through the House, which is a majority Republican, makes its way through the Senate, majority Republican. JFK is assassinated. And so LBJ is forced to essentially push this into legislation, and now it's law. And he gets to take credit for basically pushing the Civil Rights Act, when in truth, he was vehemently against it, historically against it. He was always for segregation. He was always for Jim Crow, until it no longer served their greater purpose as a party. So that being said, we get to a place now where the very same party uses the very same mask. Oh, you poor black people. How is that any different than how they viewed black folks in Jim Crow or slavery? You can't do anything for yourself. You are lesser than human. You're incapable of thinking for yourself. That's how white liberals treat me as a quote unquote black conservative. Surely you must not be able to think correctly. Surely I must fix your thinking for you, as opposed to accepting that I may just happen to have a different value system. I may happen to have a different allegiance politically, social, economically. No, I can't think for myself. I must be bamboozled. I must be, too smooth brained to understand that this is what's good for me. And so they pander and they use taxpayer dollars to push these initiatives and pretend that they care. That's one thing that's not oftentimes dove into, is all these social programs are nothing more than essentially something the Democratic Party uses. So they say, look what we did. Look what we did for these poor black people, these poor colored people, these poor whatever, marginalized people, etc. Whatever new classification and group that they decide to create in order to continue to be in places of power. And, Dr. Carol Swain, she had a brilliant statement where she said, so what has the Republican Party been doing lately for people of color or black people in America? Well, they've been viewing us as equals. You see, they were the ones who fought against slavery in the 1860s. They're the ones who fought against Jim Crow in the 1960s. The Republican Party stood behind this. They're the ones who were fighting for women's suffrage and women's rights. This is a reality. Go look up who voted for what all throughout history. Who were the first party to have black representatives, female representatives, etc., in government, at the highest levels in government? Look it up for yourself. And so the Republican Party was doing the actual thing in the same way we see now with DJT, and the Democratic Party was talking about doing it, right? So, let's say Doge. That idea of Doge has been around for a very long time. Not as Doge, but as government efficiency. You can go as far back as, Bill Clinton, etc., speaking of creating greater efficiency. We need to stop wasting money, blah, 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 blah. Clinton comes and goes. Well, you have Bush Sr., Clinton comes and goes. Bush Jr., you have Barack Obama, and then you have Trump. You have Biden, and then you have Trump once again. And it takes for Trump to come into office after at least 3 Democrats who continue to talk about cutting waste for God knows how long, who actually does it, and he becomes public enemy number 1. And the reason why they're pissed off at him is because he's actually doing it. Because they can't take the credit necessarily for the thing, right? They were supposed to be the party for poor people, for marginalized people. They were never really that. They just used that. Right. And again, it's all politics. I completely understand that. And again, though I have my biases, I still have to look at the full picture. I can't let myself be so smitten by any affiliation that I can't think for myself. That's how you become a liberal, Democrat, progressive in the first place. You have absolved the ability to simply think for yourself. And therefore, you're allowing the establishment to think for you. And that can happen in any side, any affiliation, whatever it may be. But, again, as far as the liberal racist sentiments, I came up in the Bay Area and, that's the hub of wokeness. And the amount of times I got the subtle nuances of it was unprecedented. I got family in the South. I've been up and down the South. You know, I've been in big cities. I've been in cities that aren't even incorporated or towns that aren't even incorporated. And I've almost never, because I can only assume that maybe an incident or two were racism, but outside of that, I've never experienced any blatant, outright racism. People talk about sundown cities or sundown towns. I have not been to a sundown town. Maybe I need to visit and see for myself, right? Because these kind of concepts are continuously pushed to perpetuate this message of systemic racism is the biggest problem for black people. Black people are under racism, blah, blah. Even this, that's why I don't agree with these individuals, because it always comes back to this thing of, well, we're not paying more attention to racism. We're not paying more attention to racism, race politics. The very last words, race politics, race. But what is true is that white liberals are the most racist. They are. If you want to classify it, black liberals and white liberals are the most racist people solely because they're solely fixated on race. They're obsessed with the race. Everything is about race and racial discrepancies. And I think it's the most racist if you think somebody has the inability to do something because of their race. And this idea of white supremacy actually perpetuates that. The idea of white supremacy does more than the actual white supremacy itself. Yes, I put bunny ears on that. I put quotations. Because I'm yet to see somebody who shows me something definitively in current day that is just outright, that's white supremacy and nothing else. Almost every time it's a nuanced conversation. White supremacy is the reason why black people aren't being employed. Why don't we factor in, first and foremost, is this demographic being educated into these fields? So qualifications that are being matched. You know, there's a lot of white folks who aren't making it into certain industries, tech, etc. They're dominated by, you know, Chinese Americans, Indian Americans, and Paki Americans, etc. Like, they're dominated by these people because that's what's being valued most in their culture. That's what's being valued most in their communities per se. I think culture might be the best word, so I'll stick to that. It's what's being valued in the culture. Education, you know, work in these high earning, high capacity STEM jobs, etc. That's just what's being valued. So you have to look at what's the value system of the people. What is the culture? What is being pushed? What's being perpetuated? You know, I would not be able to talk about these things to nauseum if there wasn't a reality that most black folks in America are being fed this idea that what's stopping you is your race. What's stopping you is white supremacy, as opposed to your own actions, your own intentions, your own non-actions. What are you doing and what are you not doing? That's equally as important, because some of the things you don't do end you up in the place that you are. You didn't put in the work necessary. You didn't learn the necessary skill set to be in the place that you want to be. So you miss out on opportunity. You don't create opportunity for yourself. Like in the inception of America, there was nothing to just be given to you. You had to create it. That's the difference too between, you know, oh, America was built by immigrants. It was built by settlers. It was built by individuals who came here and had to build something. Now you get a damn check. You know, you go to a sanctuary city and the government, they'll take care of you. They're going to use taxpayer dollars. The system that's already built is going to be taking care of those who just came here. Not saying, you know, oh, nobody's working who comes here. No, that would be disingenuous. But that's the reality is before the immigration that genuinely helped, you know, the Andrew Carnegies coming from Scotland, the wee Scotsman coming over here and building something, and Elon Musk coming over here and building something. That's the immigration that actually that creates for what we now experience, which is a system that can now take care of and babysit people, which again, I don't believe in, but that's a conversation for another time. But yeah, I'm glad that this awareness is showing up everywhere. Even with black liberals, they're like, wait a minute, black quote unquote Democrats are peeping exactly what's going on. Wait until y'all fully start to think for yourselves and you see how real it really gets. Oh my goodness. Appreciate you guys for tuning in. Now, if you'd like to stay around, make sure to click that little subscribe button down there, or you can show some love by going to the description below and clicking on the button titled Buy Me a Coffee. Leave a little something there, or click on the Cash App. Leave a little something here. Till the next time, peace.
I fell in love with the sunshine. I fell in love with the light. I Fell in love with the full moon. Fell in love with the night. I can see the light again. I can see the light. You can see the life in him illuminate the night.
I know the time is taking. A 365, that's a full rotation. I see you looking up, you know them constellations. Constantly gazing like house of praises, you get to praising.